Imagine this. You're a soldier. You've somehow survived the artillery, the trenches, the poison gas, only to be killed not by the enemy, but by your own side. This is the story of why armies for centuries executed their own men for a crime called cowardice. So, let me ask you, in a war, what do you think the ultimate crime is? Is it something huge, something obvious, like betraying your country? Or is it something a little more personal, something terrifyingly human? Well, let's break this down. On one hand, you have treason. It's pretty clear-cut, right? You're betraying your country. But on the other hand, you have this thing called cowardice, betraying your nerve. This was a charge so dangerously vague that a soldier could literally be executed just for admitting that he was too scared to fight. Yeah, see, unlike a crime like mutiny, which is pretty easy to define, the charge of cowardice was just dangerously subjective. It could mean pretty much anything an officer decided it meant right there in the heat of the moment. And this right here really shows you just how confusing it all was. A single act, like refusing an order to go over the top, could get you charged with, well, any of these. Disobeying an order, cowardice, abandoning your post, desertion. The lines were so blurry that the charge you got often just came down to the mood of your commanding officer. Now, you'd think a charge like desertion would be pretty straightforward, right? You run away. But check this out. For the British Army in World War I, it wasn't just the act of running away. It was also just thinking about it, talking about it, or even helping somebody else do it. I mean, this incredibly broad definition is why it accounted for a staggering 75% of all British executions between 1914 and 1920. So you have to ask, why were armies so completely obsessed with punishing fear? Well, it all boiled down to this one core belief that military command held, that panic is like a disease. It's an infection that can spread like wildfire through the ranks and cause an entire army to just collapse from the inside out. And this wasn't just some abstract theory. In 1917, a French general, Robert Nivelle, he promised this swift, decisive victory with one massive attack. The result? An absolute catastrophe. 187,000 French casualties with almost nothing to show for it. And what happened next was just stunning. I mean, look at this. The French army simply broke. We're talking about roughly half of all its divisions mutinied. They just refused to take part in any more of these suicidal attacks. The army was, for all intents and purposes, on strike. Now, this event nearly knocked France right out of the war. Seriously, if the Germans had known how bad it was, history could be completely different. So the French command responded with absolute brutal force. Mass trials, executions, penal battalions, the whole shebang. The key takeaway here is that this experience just solidified that military belief that fear had to be stamped out with an even greater fear. So this institutional fear of, fear, it led to this deeply flawed system of justice. And with it came this brutal menu of punishments, all designed for one thing, to enforce discipline through absolute terror. And here's how that justice actually worked. An officer accuses you right there on the spot. You then face a so-called trial in front of 3 other officers, usually without a lawyer to defend you. A life-or-death verdict could be handed down in less than 30 minutes. And once a general signed off on it, the execution could happen within 24 hours. There was no real defense, no due process. It was a conveyor belt. This idea of punishing the group isn't new at all. The ancient Romans had a practice called decimation. If a unit was disgraced in battle, 1 in every 10 soldiers, chosen completely by lottery, was beaten to death by his own comrades. It's a horrifying way to enforce collective responsibility. The British had their own methods of institutional humiliation, too. It was called field punishment number 1. It involved tying a soldier up, kind of in a crucifixion position, to a post or a wheel for hours a day. And this was often done in full view of the other soldiers, and sometimes even within range of enemy fire. And then you had the penal battalions. They were made infamous by the Soviets in World War II under Stalin's not one step back order. These were units filled with condemned soldiers, and they were assigned the most suicidal tasks you can possibly imagine. Clearing minefields by walking through them, leading hopeless assaults. The death rates were, as you'd expect, astronomical. So all of these abstract rules, these institutional fears, they all funnel down and become intensely real in one tragic human story, the case of Private Eddie Slovic. He was the only American soldier executed for desertion since the Civil War. And in his own haunting words, Slovic saw his fate with total clarity. He wrote, "They just need to make an example out of somebody, and I'm it." He knew. He knew he was being made a scapegoat. So how did it possibly come to this? In October of 1944, Slovic, who was a draftee with a criminal past who absolutely hated guns, he just deserted. Now, crucially, he confessed, not once, but twice, in writing. His timing was just terrible. Desertion rates were spiking, and the high command wanted to send a very clear message. His trial lasted less than 2 hours, and the death sentence was ultimately confirmed by the Supreme Allied Commander himself, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And this is the fact that makes his story so incredibly stark. During the entire Second World War, over 21,000 American soldiers were tried for desertion. 49 of them were sentenced to death, but only one man was actually executed. Just one. Eddie Slovic. So why does all this matter today? Well, because our entire understanding of what happens to a human being's mind on the battlefield has completely changed. And this has led to a modern reckoning with these past events, forcing us all to reevaluate where justice ends and trauma begins. Let's just go back to World War I for a second. During that war, the British and Commonwealth armies executed 306 of their own men for cowardice and desertion. 306. And many of them were just teenagers. Boys, really, sent into an industrial slaughterhouse and then punished for breaking. But then, in 2006, something really remarkable happened. All 306 of those men were officially pardoned. And the reason why? A modern, compassionate understanding of shell shock, the condition that we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. They were no longer seen as criminals, but as what they truly were, casualties. And that really brings us to the final question, doesn't it? When a soldier breaks under the unimaginable pressure of combat, is it an act of cowardice, or is it an injury, a casualty of war, just as real and just as devastating as any physical wound? What's the difference?